What if some of our toughest chronic illnesses, the ones that just don't seem to respond to standard treatments, what if the answer isn't in a new pill, but actually on our plate? It sounds pretty out there, right? But today we're diving into some truly remarkable case reports that explore just that idea. They suggest that for some people, the path to getting their life back might just start with their food. Okay, let's get into it. Just listen to this. This comes from a 62-year-old man who'd been battling Crohn's disease for a huge chunk of his life. It really gets to the heart of what we're exploring today. This isn't about just feeling a little bit better. For some, it feels like a total life transformation, like a second chance. All right, so here's the plan. First, we'll look at why people would even consider such an extreme diet. Then we'll break down what these diets actually are, check out the incredible outcomes from these studies, and then try to unpack the science. We'll also touch on this idea of nutrient density and wrap up with a really important look at why we need a lot more research. So, first things first. Why would anyone turn to something so restrictive? Well, it almost always begins with a desperate search for answers, when you feel like you've tried everything else and nothing has worked. Think about conditions like schizophrenia or severe inflammatory bowel disease. When treatments don't work, the impact on a person's life can be absolutely devastating. We're talking about being unable to hold a job, losing relationships. It can lead to total social isolation and just a terrible quality of life. The source material is really clear about just how deep this struggle goes. Let's make this real with a specific story from the research. It's about a 32-year-old man with schizophrenia. He was dealing with paranoid delusions, even suicidal thoughts. It cost him everything, his job, his relationships, and he ended up homeless. He was in and out of hospitals, but he just felt like none of the treatments were getting to the real root of the problem. This is the kind of rock bottom that makes people search for a different way. And that desperate search leads right into our next section, making a radical shift in diet. When you've hit a wall with all the conventional options, where do you go? For the people in these reports, the answer was food. So the first approach we're talking about is ketogenic metabolic therapy, or KMT. Now, this isn't just cutting back on bread. This is a serious therapeutic diet, very high in fat, moderate protein, and almost no carbs. The entire point is to flip your body's metabolic switch, so instead of running on sugar or glucose, it starts burning fat and producing these things called ketones for fuel. And if you take that idea and push it even further, you get the carnivore diet. This is basically the most extreme elimination diet you can imagine. You're eating pretty much only meat, seafood, eggs, and animal fats. That's it. It is ketogenic by default, but it also strips out every single plant food, which, as we're going to see, might be a really important factor for some people. Okay, so what actually happens when someone makes a change this drastic? This is where things get really interesting. The reported outcomes, these stories of remission, they're just incredible. Let's circle back to that 32-year-old man. Just look at this before and after. On the left, his life with standard treatments. He was homeless, suffering from psychosis, totally unable to function. Now look at the right, after switching to a carnivore ketogenic diet. His symptoms went away, he got off the streets, and he was able to actually start living his life again. The report describes it as a complete 180. And this wasn't just a one-off. There was another report that followed 10 patients with inflammatory bowel disease. And what's so wild is how long they stayed in remission. We're talking years, 3, 5, 6, even one person for an amazing 11 years. All while sticking to the diet and often after they had stopped their medication. And it's not just a feeling. They actually measure this. Using a standard quality of life questionnaire, the average score for these patients before the diet was 95 out of a total of 224. Not great, but on the diet, that score shot up to 216. It more than doubled. That is a massive, life-altering leap. We're talking huge improvements across the board, from physical pain to their emotional well-being and social life. Okay, so these results are pretty jaw-dropping. But the big question, the million-dollar question is, how? How could changing what you eat have such a powerful, profound effect? Let's get into the potential science behind it all. So the main theory revolves around this state called ketosis. Like we said, when you deprive your body of carbs, it's forced to start burning fat for energy. A byproduct of that process is ketone bodies. And it turns out these ketones aren't just an alternative fuel source, they're powerful little molecules that can actually change how your cells work, especially your brain cells and your immune cells. So what do these ketones actually do? Well, researchers think they might cool down inflammation and something called oxidative stress, two big problems in a lot of chronic diseases. They might also help our tiny cellular power plants, the mitochondria, work better and give the brain a cleaner, more stable fuel.
And of course, you can't forget that these diets are also cutting out a ton of foods that could be triggering the immune system in the first place, all while completely changing the ecosystem of your gut bacteria.
All this focus on food quality brings up a really interesting point. It's not just about what you take out of your diet, but also what you put in. And this leads us right to the idea of nutrient density, getting the most bang for your buck from every bite you take. A fascinating study on Indonesian foods gives us a really cool way to think about this. They use something called a nutrient density score, or NDS. The idea is simple, but it's powerful. For every calorie you eat, how many vitamins, minerals, and other good things are you getting? You want a high score. It means more nutrition for less empty energy.
And this chart just lays it all out perfectly. Look at the top. You've got organ meats and dark leafy greens with these sky-high nutrient scores. And way down at the bottom, starchy stuff and processed snacks. This is a huge clue as to why a well-formulated carnivore diet, one that includes things like liver, might be so powerful. It's not just any meat, it's the most nutrient-packed parts of the animal.
Now, these two charts add another really practical layer. The one on the left shows that foods like vegetables give you a ton of nutrients for very few calories. Then, the chart on the right hits you with another key point. A lot of these super nutrient-dense foods are also really affordable. It kind of busts the myth that you have to be rich to eat healthy, high-quality food.
Okay, as exciting and hopeful as all of this is, we have to pump the brakes a little bit and end on a really important note of caution. This is brand new territory, and that means the science is still playing catch-up.
So, the big question, are these diets some kind of miracle cure? And the honest answer, based on the science we have right now, is we don't know for sure. And you know who's the first to say that? The researchers who published these reports.
And this part is absolutely crucial to understand. Everything we've talked about comes from individual stories, from case reports. That is not the same as a huge, randomized controlled trial, which is the gold standard for medical evidence. There's a big risk we're only hearing about the success stories. And honestly, we just don't have a lot of data on the long-term effects of these diets, especially when it comes to things like cholesterol.
The authors of these studies are super clear about this. They say that while these cases are incredibly promising, they aren't proof. What they are is a powerful signal, a call to action for the scientific community to do more rigorous research to figure out if this really works, how it works, and who it might work for.
But it does leave us with a pretty incredible question to chew on. What if the future of medicine, for some of our most stubborn diseases, isn't just found in the pharmacy, but also in the kitchen? These stories suggest it's a possibility we really need to explore.